Chapter 3. Elizabeth peered into the looking-glass, admiring her maid's handiwork. The intricate style Pansy had twisted her hair into was the perfect foil to the deceptive simplicity of her gown. She absolutely adored the shade of palest green and the dainty flowers stitched around the neck, sleeves, and hem. No wonder it had been expensive, but it was worth every farthing. She just hoped her father thought so when his secretary received the bills. She smiled slyly at her reflection when she realized that it would be her mother who had received the lecture, not her, if her father did take exception to her expenses. Her mother would no doubt argue that any expense was worth the investment in getting her youngest daughter settled comfortably, and without being overly smug, she knew she was looking well that night. The Earl of Heath crossed her mind, but she shoved the unwanted thoughts to the back of her mind. She refused to dwell on how handsome he was, especially when he had been trying not to laugh at something she had said. She was unsure what had come over her that afternoon. She was so rarely comfortable in the company of gentlemen. How was it possible that I had relaxed with the notorious Earl? She demanded of herself. Sticking her tongue out at her reflection, Elizabeth's laugh was self-conscious as she realized she would appear quite vain to anyone watching her as she gazed into the looking-glass. Straightening to her full height, which wasn't much higher than the Earl's shoulder, she realized, she once again had to dismiss thoughts of Lord Sinclair. She turned to speak to her maid, who was bustling about the room. "I am most pleased with your work this evening, Pansy. Thank you for convincing me this was the perfect style. You were quite correct. And I dare say the 1,000,000 pins you put in will ensure not a single hair dares to budge out of place." "Oh, my lady, you would look lovely even if I just put your hair into 2 ties on the side of your head. But thank you so much for saying you're pleased with my efforts this evening. I do think this style quite suits your beautiful face." "Well, I do appreciate that it feels very secure. It makes me nervous when I have to worry whether or not my hair will hold up to the activities of the evening." "Are you expecting your evening to be particularly vigorous, my lady?" The maid was sceptical. Elizabeth laughed. "No more so than usual at a ball, Pansy. But you would be surprised how often ladies have to run to a retiring room because their coif did not withstand their exertions." "Truly, my lady? Are their maids turned off that very night? I would think your mother would turn me off without a single grout if I were to allow you to leave your room without your hair being properly secured." "You may be right, Pansy," Elizabeth laughed, "but I would think it is rarely the maid's fault. But never mind. No one could find any fault with my appearance this evening, and for that I am grateful." Seeing that the maid was about to protest her praise, Elizabeth did not allow her to speak, interrupting the attempt with her next words. "I shall now bid you a good night," she said as she swept from the room. Not surprisingly, Lady Castleton was already in the foyer waiting for her. "What took you so long, my dear? You are becoming a laggard of late. Now hurry along. I have heard that it is expected to be a veritable crush this evening at the Olivers' ball." "Well, of course it will," Elizabeth muttered under her breath. "They have the smallest ballroom in the ton." "I did not hear you clearly, my dear. You really ought not to mumble. Gentlemen prefer a lady who enunciates. And do not speak ill of our hosts, my darling. Gentlemen expect their wives to be sweet and kind, so you must make an effort to control your tongue." Elizabeth did make a colossal effort to keep herself from telling her mother exactly what she thought of all these ridiculous reminders that she was forever saying, tidbits of advice for catching a husband, that Elizabeth found highly unwelcome. Smiling serenely at her mother, she thought she was already an expert at controlling her tongue. She meekly followed the Countess out to the waiting carriage. When they arrived in front of Lady Oliver's house, Elizabeth could not help admiring the elegant lines of the building. Even though it was smaller than many of their well-born friends, it truly was lovely, and Elizabeth quite thought that she would enjoy living in a similar place. Climbing the stairs at her mother's side, she glanced along the street and admired the architecture, not paying attention to the other guests arriving at the select invitation ball. "Elizabeth Marie Castleton, you need to focus." Her mother's low, irritated whisper reached through her preoccupied thoughts, and Elizabeth quickly turned her eyes to look at her mother with a polite smile. Interest she was unable to feign at this point, but she could at least be polite. "I apologize, Mother. I was admiring the beautiful homes on this street." Her mother seemed to be slightly mollified as she thought of an alarming possibility. "I do believe Lords Dunbar and Rothesay have lodgings on this street, so perhaps you might find yourself living here one day." Elizabeth couldn't help but laugh over her mother's single-minded determination. "Mayhap," was all she would say in reply as she turned her attention to their hostess, who was waiting to welcome them. "Thank you so much for coming," Lady Oliver greeted kindly. Elizabeth admired her calm and ability to focus on each guest. Often at functions such as these, the hostess appeared harried or bored, merely going through the motions of welcoming the arriving guests. But Lady Oliver appeared sincerely delighted to have Lady Castleton and Lady Elizabeth attend her ball. Elizabeth began to look forward to the evening. If the hostess were that appealing, surely the entertainment she provided would be worth her time, Elizabeth reasoned. As she followed her mother toward the ballroom, she could recognize that many of her acquaintances and friends were also in attendance. That ought not to be surprising in the rarefied world of the ton, but Elizabeth did wish there would be something novel to liven up the evening. Ladies Emmeline and Constance hailed her. "You go on with your friends, my dear," Elizabeth's mother advised. "I will join the other chaperons and keep an eye on the proceedings. And don't forget to smile, my dear. Gentlemen prefer a cheerful countenance." Elizabeth gave up being irritated with her mother's determination. She knew it came from a place of love and a desire to see her settled, as well as a spirit of competition with her sister and best friend. She finally felt amusement over her mother's reminder. With a bright smile, she replied to her mother, "I will certainly keep that in mind." She started walking toward her friends when she felt a shiver of awareness shimmy up her neck, just before a deep voice spoke softly in her ear. "What has tickled your amusement, my dear lady?" Willing herself not to shiver again, Elizabeth turned to the Earl, determined to put him in his place. But when her eyes collided with his intelligent blue gaze, she felt another shiver threaten, and her smile turned into a frown. "Are you stalking me, my lord? I really find it quite surprising that we have gone weeks without ever exchanging words, and now it seems as though you are always underfoot." "That is no way to speak to a wealthy, unattached earl, my dear. What would your mamma say?" He chuckled over her indignation, causing it to ratchet up another notch. She tried to turn away. She wasn't going to bother dignifying him with a response, but his warm hand closed over her elbow. "I beg of you, my dear lady, do not turn away. I was merely teasing you. Please dance with me. I do believe this is our song playing." Elizabeth blinked at him in surprise. As her ears attuned to the melody the orchestra was playing, she was taken aback to realize he was right. It was the same waltz they had danced to the night before. She wanted to refuse, but could feel speculative gazes looking at them. And he really was a handsome man, as well as a skilled dancer. It needn't be a trial to spend the next moments with him. And it would be easier to explain than her refusal, especially if her mother had seen them talking. With a less than gracious sigh, Elizabeth accepted the Earl's hand. "Why are you all of a sudden paying so much attention to me, my lord? I really do not think we would suit." Elizabeth had heard the rumours that the notorious Earl was looking for a new Countess, but she did not think the man was stupid enough to pursue her after she had told him her views of marriage. She was quite certain there were other, more biddable ladies who would serve his needs far better than she could. "I have no intention of being his next dead Countess," she thought with a less enjoyable shiver. Elizabeth felt his gaze sharpen on her face at the telltale movement. She pasted a serene smile to her face, awaiting his response. She was glad the waltz did not require them to be constantly separated at regular intervals, as he would have to answer her question promptly. "Is it so difficult to believe I might find you irresistible?" he countered with a question of his own. "Yes, it is. Now tell the truth." Elizabeth could tell that her answer surprised him, as well as brought him amusement. To her relief, he did not laugh too loudly, but his low chuckle made a flutter start up in her belly. She gritted her teeth and ignored the tug of attraction. Justice admired his companion's persistence. She was surprisingly intelligent for such a pretty girl. In his experience, the prettier the girl, the more self-absorbed they became. Just look at his wife. He tried not to allow his thoughts to dwell on his late wife very often, but Lady Elizabeth certainly compared favourably with the beautiful, spoiled young woman he had taken as his wife. He needed to get a new Countess eventually, and Lady Elizabeth did not fit the right description of what he was looking for, but he certainly enjoyed her company. And he needed information from her. How could he get her to cooperate? He decided the straightforward young woman would appreciate his honesty in exchange for her own. "I need you to tell me what you know about Sir Jason Broderick. This is important, Lady Elizabeth. I know you don't trust me, and I know I have a rotten reputation. But I swear to you, I am not in cahoots with him. If you know anything about him, you know he is trouble. I am trying to stop him, but I need you to tell me what you know." He watched in frustration as she chewed on her lip in indecision. He had to wrench his eyes away from her mouth. He could not allow himself to be distracted by attraction to her. Gazing into her eyes, he could see her struggle to decide if she should trust him. He was gratified when her worried gaze cleared, and it appeared that she had come to a decision. "Very well, my lord. I will tell you what I know, but you must swear to keep it in the strictest confidence, as it is not really my secret to tell. The others involved are no longer available, and if you know of something he is up to, I ought to give you whatever information I can so that you can stop him if need be. I think he might already be taken care of, but if he is not, then he must be stopped." He felt his grip on her tighten, and he vigorously swirled her into the next turn of the dance, bringing a light of joy into her eyes, but a reprimand to her lips. "My lord, you mustn't draw undue attention to us. If I'm going to confide in you, we shall need privacy, and the very last thing we need is anyone finding out about it." Chastened, Justice saw the wisdom of her words, and he subsided into the steady rhythm of the waltz while she composed her thoughts. He tried to figure out a way to get her alone so he could hear what she had to tell him. Propriety called for him to wait until the next day and call upon her once more, but he was suddenly impatient and could not wait. "There's a picture gallery on the second floor and several rooms off that. Meet me there 10 minutes after our dance ends. You can tell me everything you know then." "My lord, I question the wisdom of such a meeting." "Don't worry, no one will be up there, and we won't be caught. My curiosity is leaving my patience shattered." Elizabeth felt a thrill shiver down her spine at his bold words. She had always been a conventional sort of girl, despite her insistence on wanting to make a love match. The thought of having an adventure with a notorious earl filled her with a heady mix of anticipation, excitement, and fear. This must have been what her dear friend Rosamond had felt when she was conspiring with Wrentham against Broderick, and what had motivated her to take such risks. Elizabeth decided she was ready for an adventure of her own. Like the Earl said, no one would know, and her reputation would remain intact. And really, she reasoned, it was for the greater good. If Broderick was still free and up to no good, he needed to be stopped. If it was within her abilities to help, she couldn't very well turn squeamish at the first obstacle. "Very well, my lord, I will meet you in 10 minutes, she promised, as the strains of the waltz drew to a close. She offered him a brief curtsy, and then turned on her heel and departed his company without a backward glance. Constance and Emmeline were quick to surround her. "You just danced with the evil Earl of Heath?" Emmeline was aghast and avid with curiosity all at once. "I really don't think you should call him that, Lady Emmeline." Elizabeth could hear the reprimand in her voice and cringed at the thought of the gossip that would ensue. "You haven't set your cap for Lord Sinclair, have you?" Constance was quick to follow her sister's lead. "No, I have not done something so vulgar as to set my cap for anyone, let alone the Earl of Heath. It was just a dance, ladies, nothing to cause alarm." "It looked a little more involved than just a dance," Emmeline commented snidely, her eyes bright with curious glee. "He really is a handsome man, but I would be afraid if I were you, Lady Elizabeth." "I appreciate your concern," Elizabeth replied dryly. She refused to grant either of the other women the satisfaction of knowing that she shared their concerns. She would not sink to their level of gossip and innuendo. "That was a vigorous and long dance. I am just going to go to the refreshment room and get a glass of punch. Enjoy your evening." Elizabeth dismissed them as carefully as she could manage, not wanting them to accompany her, but also not wishing to stir up their curiosity either. With relief, she left them both behind and made her way to the room where Lady Oliver had arranged for refreshments to be served. Elizabeth really did feel the need for a drink before she went in search of the picture gallery and her appointment with the Earl. Nerves made her mouth run dry. She wished she could bring the punch bowl with her. She felt like giggling over this silly thought, and realized she was bordering on hysterical over the crazy stunt she was about to pull. But the Earl was quite correct. Broderick needed to be stopped if he was still on the loose. She was certain Rosamond was safe, but she couldn't be so sure that Broderick was under control, although she had full confidence in the Duke of Wrentham. Trying to be as unobtrusive as possible, Elizabeth made every effort to glide innocently from the room, making her way to the back staircase and climbing to the second floor as the Earl had directed. No one else was about, and she felt very conspicuous standing in the large, empty room. Before she knew it, a warm hand closed around her arm and pulled her into another chamber. She hadn't even noticed the open door and the handsome man standing there waiting for her. He shut the door with a quiet click, and Elizabeth turned to him with her hands still clutching her throat in fear. "You nearly scared the life out of me, my lord!" "Did you not expect me to be here?" He stood very near to her, with his hand still on her arm. Her heart was hammering in her chest, first from the fright he gave her, but now from his nearness. Realizing he was going to think her a simpleton, she tried to recover. "Well, of course I did, but surely you realize my nerves are frayed from the impropriety of meeting you. But never mind about that. I don't mean to be a ninnyhammer, my lord. We ought not to spend any more time here than necessary. Before I tell you everything I know about Broderick, could you tell me why you want to know?" He finally let go of her arm, and she took a small step back. She hoped he didn't notice or realize that she found him attractive. That would just make this even more mortifying than it already is. "Why, my lady? Are you trying to defend him?" The Earl sounded shocked as he questioned her. "No, of course not." She was aghast at the thought. "Really, I am just curious. I would like to help you in your investigation if I could. I was helping my friend Rose investigate him a little bit, and I found it fascinating and exciting to be involved in such an inquiry. Could I please help you, my lord?" She could hear her voice becoming wheedling and blushed with embarrassment. "I am sure I would be of great help," she continued with more dignity. "I know Rose was happy for my help." "Let me first see what you know, and then I will determine if you will be able to be of much help to me." Elizabeth was frustrated with his non-committal answer, but decided to quit dithering on the subject. If they were going to avoid detection, they needed to keep this audience as short as possible. "Very well, my lord. I will accept that as a polite no, but I will tell you what I know anyway. I agree with you that Broderick is a very bad man and needs to be stopped if he has more schemes up his sleeves." Lord Sinclair took her hands and was about to lead her to a chair when there was commotion at the door of the room they were in. Elizabeth froze and knew her mouth was probably dropping open in shock as the door burst open and a crowd of people crammed into the room. It seemed that bedlam broke out as everyone spoke at once. Elizabeth could feel all the blood draining from her face and head, and she felt momentarily faint. She was grateful for the arm the Earl placed solicitously around her, but knew in that moment that it was about to condemn them both to an uncertain future. "Elizabeth Marie Castleton, what is the meaning of this?" Elizabeth's mother demanded, obviously trying to sound strict, but the glee was lurking in her tone. Elizabeth wanted to sink through the floor when she heard the buzz of the other occupants, as they speculated about her and the Earl. Emmeline and Constance were also in the background, fanning the flames of gossip as they were about to incinerate her reputation. She felt almost relieved at the thought that her mother would have to leave her alone now, if she was about to be beyond the pale. She smiled wanly at her mother. "We had an important matter to discuss, mother, and did not wish to be disturbed." Elizabeth knew they had not done anything wrong, so she refused to be shamed. Elizabeth saw the Earl looking about at the gathered gossips, and then he met her eye with a look of apology. His next words caused the buzz to increase tenfold. "We needed to discuss the terms of our engagement. You may all wish us happy, although I cannot fathom what brings you all by." "Oh, Elizabeth, that is wonderful news. Now you come right along and accompany me back to the ballroom. It wouldn't do to sully your reputation at this point. What a coup! The Earl of Heath! You shall make a fine son-in-law, my lord." Lady Castleton was beaming at the Earl with such delight that Elizabeth felt sick to the pit of her stomach. She closed her eyes, hoping she could open them, and it would turn out this had all been a bad dream. Unfortunately, in the next moment, she realized it was sadly very true. Lady Emmeline and her sister were fluttering around her, agog with the news. Almost as quickly as everyone had filed into the room, they had filed back out, clearly anxious to spread the news of what they had witnessed. Within a couple short minutes, it was just the Earl, Lady Elizabeth, and her mother standing in the room with varying degrees of consternation on their faces. In the commotion, the Earl had been jostled to the other side of the room. He stayed where he was, but kept his eyes trained upon the two ladies. "This is not exactly how I would have liked this to be arranged, I must say. But I am thrilled to have you finally betrothed, my dear." "Mother, how can you stand there and say you're happy to see me engaged to marry the Earl of Heath?" Elizabeth was shocked that her mother's single-mindedness would extend to such lengths. "Why not? He is wealthy, well-born, and mannerly. He shall be an excellent husband for you, to be sure." "Mother," she began again. Grateful that he had remained on the other side of the room, Elizabeth turned her back to the Earl and kept her voice low, in the hopes that he could not hear. "I know we have already discussed this, but it bears repeating. It is rumoured he killed his wife. Do you really wish to see me committed to him for life? It might not be for very long." She knew he had heard her when she heard a soft sound behind her, as though he were snuffing out a burst of laughter. She crossed her arms and shot a glare over her shoulder at him. "And how did you know to come looking for me here?" she demanded of her mother crossly. "We had just arrived. We truly did need to talk. Nothing of a scandalous nature was about to take place." "That is neither here nor there, my darling daughter. Your little friends came and told me they were worried about you. They thought you had gotten lost, because they saw you climb the stairs to the second floor, and yet you had not returned. It struck me as being quite uncharacteristic of you, so I decided to follow you. And then the girls wanted to come too, and his lordship. It all happened very quickly, really, but all is well that ends well, as they say. Would you not agree?" "No, I would not agree. I cannot marry him," Elizabeth insisted. "You certainly should have thought of that before you agreed to an assignation with the man," came out her mother's unsympathetic reply. "This was not an assignation." Elizabeth had lost count of how many times she had wished to disappear since she had come into association with the Earl of Heath, but once more the sensation swept her. She glanced over her shoulder at him again for the barest moment, wondering how he was taking the discussion he could obviously hear, and wondering why he did not speak up. Surely he couldn't wish for this match. But the daft man remained where he was, at least on the surface looking as though he hadn't a care in the world. Elizabeth wanted to stamp her foot with frustration, but managed to hold her composure, at least in front of her mother. She would truly die of mortification if her mother gave her another lecture in front of the Earl. The dutiful daughter could just hear it. "A lady will never find a gentleman to marry if she cannot control her temper, my dear." She shook her head and dragged her attention back to her mother, as she was replying to Elizabeth's assertions. "It certainly looked like it. Why else would you be in a private room away from all the other guests, with a man holding your hands? You have no choice. You must marry him. You are just lucky that he had the good sense to see that. I am surprised and disappointed that you do not. Now, I will give you 5 minutes to discuss matters while I stand outside, and then we will return to the ball, and you will accept the congratulations that will be directed your way as graciously as you can muster." Elizabeth watched with a dropped jaw as her mother strode from the room on the heels of her words, leaving her alone with the Earl. She couldn't meet his eye. She was mortified at the turn of events. Elizabeth wanted to wail in frustration. Her one attempt at having an adventure had gone horribly wrong. "I am so sorry, my lord. I had no idea things could possibly turn out this way." She began to apologize before her anger overtook her. "But what were you thinking making a declaration like that? We could have brazened it out. Now we have to become betrothed. What were you thinking?" she repeated in her frustration. "You cannot possibly want to become leg-shackled to me, do you, my lord? Was it not just this afternoon that we discussed the matter? You are searching for a much different Countess than I shall ever prove to be." Justice took her cold, trembling hands into his and chafed them, trying to bring warmth to her as he knew she was struggling with shock. It was most definitely not how either of them had foreseen their evening progressing, but he could not find it within himself to be disappointed. She was quite correct in her assessment that she was not what he had been looking for, but he could feel anticipation building within himself at the thought of having the lovely young woman as his wife. It was the only possible way to diffuse the situation. Surely you see that. I am sorry it has turned out this way, but we can make the most of it. You are much too calm about this, my lord. I am beginning to think you had a hand in orchestrating this. I do not trust you, and I cannot imagine there is any way we shall be able to salvage a comfortable life out of this mess. Why could you not have kept your mouth shut? Elizabeth, my dear lady, you really must make an effort not to fall apart now. Justice tried to help her regain her composure. Can you not see that we can now work together against Broderick much more comfortably? He watched in amusement as her jaw became unhinged once more. Do you mean this was a ploy to get my cooperation with your investigation? I was already going to help you. There was no reason to go to such lengths. That is most certainly not what I meant, Justice insisted. I am merely trying to make the best out of a difficult situation. So you intend to just have a temporary betrothal until the gossip dies down? Justice grimaced at the hopeful note in her voice. No, we shall have to be wed. You are well and truly compromised, my dear lady. I do apologize to you. I know you came to meet me with the best of intentions, and this is a cruel recompense for your efforts. You are perfectly accurate in that, my lord. I feel as though I have been blindsided by this turn of events. She paused for a moment, and Justice held his breath, unsure of what she would say next. I do not mean to be rude or hurtful, my lord, but I really have no wish to be married to you. Would you rather be banished from polite society? He was surprised but not shocked by her words, and was trying to help her see reason. As a matter of fact, I would, my lord. If it were not for thoughts of how it would affect my mother, I very much would rather be banished. Do you not recall what I told you just this very afternoon? That I wish to marry for love? And then there is the little fact of the gossip about you, my lord. No, I cannot be comfortable contemplating a future as the Countess of Heath. I am sorry that you feel this way, my dear, but you will have to conform your thoughts to just such a development. Elizabeth wanted to stamp her foot in frustration. This was such a mess. Rosamond would have managed the entire situation far better, she was sure. She felt a momentary wish to curl up and have a good cry, but before she could even feel the tears forming in her eyes, her mother was back in the room, bustling about and fussing over her. Come along, my dear. Let us go. We must remain for at least a half an hour before we can take our leave. My lord, you may call upon my husband first thing in the morning to make the arrangements, and then you must escort my daughter for another ride in the park. It seems you have a lot to discuss. As they descended to the ballroom, Elizabeth could feel a myriad of eyes boring into her. She made every effort to keep her smile serene, despite the fact that she was howling with fury. She could see that Lady Emmeline was waiting to pounce upon her as soon as she reached the bottom of the stairs. I thought you said you weren't setting your cap at him, she began, her sly look enjoying Elizabeth's discomfort. It would seem you don't give a fig for his sullied reputation. Elizabeth felt a shockingly misplaced sense of loyalty rear up within her breast. I would beg of you to not speak ill of my future husband, my dear Lady Emmeline. I wouldn't want to have to give you the cut direct when I am the Countess of Heath. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction at the other woman's gasp. I can assure you I meant no harm, my dear Lady Elizabeth. Please do not take my little jest as an insult to his lordship. Glancing over at the Earl, Elizabeth hoped he had not heard her words. She did not want him thinking she was defending him. She did not trust the man and was shivering in fear over her future. But she would not allow the likes of Lady Emmeline to speak ill of anyone connected with her. Elizabeth doubted if she was being at all reasonable. She couldn't help a small smile that touched her lips at the ridiculousness of it all. Again, She worried that hysteria was going to overtake her, as her eyes clashed with the warm, blue gaze of her new fiancé. The rest of the evening passed in a blur as the scores of people at the ball heard the news of her betrothal and came to congratulate them. Elizabeth could feel the speculative curiosity of the assembled guests, and was grateful that etiquette prevented most from giving voice to their true thoughts, until the elderly Lady Merriweather approached her. "Are you daft, m'lady?" she asked loudly. "I beg your pardon, Lady Merriweather?" Elizabeth had a bad feeling about the direction this conversation was going to take. "How could you get yourself in a fix with the likes of Lord Sinclair, gal?" the lady persisted. "Have you not heard the rumours about him?" Elizabeth felt a wave of dizziness swamp her. Of course she was afraid. She wanted to yell at the aging busybody. She was swept with profound relief as she felt a warm hand take her arm and heard the deep rumble of the Earl's voice. "Thank you so much for offering your concern for our future, Lady Merriweather. We shall be sure to take your advice to heart." Elizabeth actually felt her lips twitch with amusement over the look of confusion covering Lady Merriweather's face. She leaned on the Earl's arm gratefully, and wondered how much longer she would have to face the rabid curiosity of the well-born crowd. As the older lady turned away from them, Elizabeth was alone with the Earl for the first time. The reprieve was momentary, she knew, as the crowds continued to press around them. "You ought to head home. You are beginning to wilt under this heat." Elizabeth did not take offense at his words, recognizing them for the concern they were meant to be. She did not want to be warmed by anything the man did. Her resentment warred with attraction as she gazed at him in silence. Innate politeness won out. "Thank you for stepping in to deal with her. I was at a loss as to what to say." "I do believe it is part of the position as fiancé," he answered her, with a dimpled smile cast her way. Elizabeth refused to be charmed. "I guess you would know," she replied, waspishly hinting at his previous betrothal. Despite her fears, she knew such a comment was beneath her, and flushed with mortification at her show of ill-bred pique. "I'm sorry, my lord. You were right. It is time for me to leave. I most definitely need some sleep. Tomorrow will be soon enough to sort out this mess." She didn't bother saying anything more to him as he escorted her and her mother to their carriage. It had been a trying day.